Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Janice Klein's Marketing Coordinator for AOE, and today Kimberly Kayler will be sitting down with John Collins for a fireside chat to discuss the role of leadership in meeting today's challenges. I would like to introduce John Collins, founder of Critical Victories. John is an executive leadership coach specializing in working with leaders and professionals in positions of public trust, an internationally renowned forensic expert and former director of forensic science for the state of Michigan. John retired from his award-winning forensic career to write 3 books and build his executive coaching practice, focusing on clients in high-stakes, high-pressure occupations. John was a member of the forensic team in the investigation of the 1996 Olympic bombing in Atlanta and has facilitated sensitive meetings and discussions on behalf of the U.S. federal government. And for those of you who don't know Kimberly Kayler, Kimberly is president of the 80-plus person AOE team, a full-service association management and marketing consulting firm. Kimberly has authored more than 2,000 articles and is the co-author of Leading with Marketing. She was the first person in Ohio to earn the Certified Professional Service Marketer designation in 1999. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Journalism and English from the University of Arizona in Tucson. She earned her Master's of Science in Organization and Management with an emphasis in leadership from Capella University. So for those of you that have joined, please put all your questions in the chat and we will make sure they get answered at the end of the discussion. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Kimberly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janice, and thank you for all that are joining us today. And John, thank you. I appreciate you joining me.
Hey, Kimberly, it's great to see you.
Thank you. I knew the moment that I met you after chatting with you just for a few minutes that it would be really fun to have you come join us. So
I'm glad we made this happen.
Yeah,
thank you.
So we're going to talk about leadership today, especially in today's world. Some of the key topics that we hear quite a bit about right now are employee burnout, employee retention. My 25-year career, workforce development has always been an issue. Just have not found a really good solutions for that one. And while our pandemic world certainly is a major factor in these challenges, how leaders respond to today's unique dynamics can make or break its success. So the first question I have for you is, what is the role of leadership in today's organization? And since that's a big, kind of hairy, audacious question, maybe I'll break it down and we can start with what's the biggest challenge that you are called upon to help related to leadership today?
Well, yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think at the heart of it that leaders have to be building the confidence of their people. Because if you think about what we're dealing with right now in today's society, especially, with the pandemic, that new circumstances and different kinds of circumstances seem to be outpacing the development of the skills needed to handle them. And so we have the pandemic. I still think that a lot of businesses and companies are still wrapping their brains around the internet and social media and all of these kinds of things. And so what happens is that all of these challenges create a lot of anxieties. And what happens is people start to get a little bit itchy when they feel like spectators in their own lives instead of players. And so what leaders really need to do is figure out a way to create an environment where their people feel like players and people feel like they have some agency in their careers and in their lives. And, oftentimes, surprisingly, that doesn't happen as often as it should. So when people reach out to me, a lot of times it's the low hanging fruit initially, like time management, prioritization, being more effective in relationships and that kind of thing. But generally what you find out is that there's some underlying things that really need to be addressed. And you, as a coach, I learned that by just, through conversation and speaking with my clients.
Well, so many jumping off points from that. I'm probably going to go off script quite a bit here with the
questions
fine. I prepared. One of the things you said that really resonated with me right away is just being an agency and really, feeling like you're a player. I like that language because we know from studies in the last year how important it is and how consumers feel that they actually have a say in their organization and from the businesses that they interact with. And I will tag on that with a recent Harvard Business Review article noted that when we trust our workplace leadership, we experience 74% more stress, 106% more energy at work, we're 50% more productive, experience 40% less burnout, etc. So we know that it's really important when we do trust our leadership. And I've seen studies in the last year that, as a general rule, we don't trust our leadership of our organizations as much as we did. So how do these high pressure, high stake environments affect people and affect teams?
Well, there's kind of a sequence of events that plays out, Kimberly, in these types of in the world that we live in right now. And with the types of clients that I work with, who are individuals and teams that are impacting people's quality of life. The decisions that they make are affecting people's quality of life and sometimes duration of life if you start getting into healthcare and public safety and that kind of thing. But what happens is that the uncertainty in the environment creates a feeling of chaos. There's kind of like a feeling of a loss of control. And then what that does is that raises anxiety. Once the anxiety levels go up, what happens is people begin to waste their energy on coping with the circumstances. And so that's energy that would be better spent on innovation, productivity, looking for relationships, or looking for opportunities for efficiency, improving relationships, or investing oneself in professional relationships. And so over time, you go from chaos to isolation. That chaos and unpredictability cause isolation because people are spending so much of their time and energy trying to just cope with their own emotions. And I think what happens is that really starts to break down relationships because people aren't connecting with each other. So in terms of what that high stakes, high pressure type of environment does to people is it rips apart relationships. People go inward, they isolate themselves. They don't always realize they're doing it. And then all of a sudden you realize that the team doesn't have the relationships and the communication and the sharing and the feisty conversation and the debate that you need to raise your game. And then all of a sudden you find you can't handle the pressures that are sitting on your lap, and then things spiral downhill.
Well, fascinating. You use the word isolation quite a bit, and my mind went to, obviously, that's a term we use quite a bit related to COVID in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
And you're not even referring to that, but obviously when we couple on top of that, isolation we feel from physically being removed in many environments from our workspace or our traditional relationships, that must add to it too. Now, you were labeled or called a public trust coach. So let's help our audience understand what that means.
Well, thank you for asking that. So what I do is I'm an executive leadership coach, and there's a lot of people in the coaching space, and which is good because there's a high demand for individuals that can help people develop the leadership skills and the managerial skills that their teams need from them. What I specialize in is working with people who are in positions that require them to earn and maintain the trust of the public. And those are positions where if they mess something up, they are on the front page of the news. And Lester Holt is talking about them on NBC Nightly News and that kind of stuff. And that presents there's a lot of leadership implications with that, as you might expect, because what you end up with is you have a culture that is where perfection becomes an expectation. And because perfection is often an unattainable goal, then your culture is constantly struggling with feelings of anxiety and uncertainty and so forth. So, I focus on leaders whose decisions really have a tremendous amount of impact on people's lives. So, you think about the architects, and a colleague of mine was responsible for the identification of all of the bodies and the collapse of the Surfside condominium in Florida. Okay. And so that is an example of a person in a position of public trust, because if she messes something up, or she provides the wrong identity to one of the victims, that causes a lot of problems. And so there's a lot of unique pressures that are placed on those individuals. And I've been in that situation throughout my career, and so I know how to handle it.
So my mind, of course, went to crisis communications, because that's what my expertise is, and prepping leaders from a crisis standpoint. But from what I'm hearing, that this is more. I mean, so if I would think it would actually be limiting if we just look at things from a crisis standpoint. You're really talking about something that's a little more holistic, looking at it from a leader standpoint and broadening. Is that correct? Or
No, that is because the types of clients that I work with are dealing with what I think, and I certainly don't say this to sound pretentious, but the people in high stakes, high impact types of positions that are in positions of public trust are making decisions on a daily basis that I think many people out there would find to be like being in a crisis. And so there's
Sure.
individuals on a daily basis. They worry about things that really take a toll. But certainly crisis communication is something that I do get involved with because it's the unexpected. So, crisis is the ultimate competition against circumstance, and you're either ready for it or you're not.
Well put. So shifting gears here, how does the work from home environment fit into this conversation with regard to leadership, management, and some of the factors we've discussed? So you've started to go down that path a little bit, and if we can expand, what does our COVID world look like?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because first of all, I want to disclose, I have kind of a different take on this than I think what I've read in the press. First of all, I have a hard time buying the argument that COVID revealed that distance, remote work, and dispersed teams are advantageous. I don't buy that. I think that a team that is together will always outperform a team that is dispersed. If all of the other variables are held together. But what I think has happened though is that, and this is, I think, a little bit more troubling, and it probably could be a whole nother subject of a talk, is that I think there were a lot of organizations out there that had toxic cultures before the pandemic started. And so when you were forced to get people out of those cultures and in remote locations, all of a sudden they didn't have to deal with that toxicity and they had more energy. And so I think that's one of the advantages that organizations saw. But I still believe that if you can have a healthy organizational culture with a lot of collaboration, a lot of conversation, sharing of ideas, mutual accountability, that team, when it's together, is always going to outperform a dispersed team. But I think the good thing, to answer your question, is that the pandemic forced us to think about these things. We never really had to. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of there'll be research on this. I'm sure that the Society for Human Resource Management is paying attention to this, and other organizations about, what does happen with remote workplace. But very quickly, just one more thing. Look, leaders have to be creative when you have a dispersed workforce or dispersed teams. Leaders have to be creative in manufacturing togetherness. It could be simple as just, sending out pictures of your people with little bios, or what are you doing today? Just to keep each other in each other's space, even though you're working remotely.
Well, you're a kindred spirit to me with regard to this topic, because I've run a remote company for 20 years, and when I have discussions and people say, oh, we need to get everybody back to the office, and, it worked for a time, but we really need people back. And the discussions I will have with them is that, if the culture didn't work externally, you need to make sure you're putting the effort into it. I mean, our remote team worked really well for 20 years, pre-pandemic as well, because we helped build the culture, to your point.
Right.
No different than you have to build a culture. If you're in the office, you have to take very divisive steps, and that's where the leadership part comes in. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So this past year has challenged many leaders from a crisis standpoint. Tag teaming on crisis again. What's the role of a leader with regard to crisis strategy and planning?
Oh boy, you have to lead. You have to lead in a way that incentivizes people to think and to learn. And the problem is that, look, especially in a stressful environment, the tendency is to kind of go into controlling mode and micromanaging mode. And leaders that do that over a long period of time, they really take away all of the incentives for their employees to learn and to think about, how can I get better? And so when the crisis comes, If you've had a culture that's had a lot of micromanagement and a lot of control, then you've got a workforce of people that never really had any reason to want to learn or to prepare or to take responsibility, because everything was being controlled very centrally from a small number of leaders. And then all of a sudden the crisis hits and nobody knows what to do. And the leader realizes, I actually need a team to help me through this, but I don't have anybody that can back me up. And that's when things go south. And so, to use an athletic analogy, it's often said that in an athletic contest, the game is won or lost, not on the day of the contest, but in the preparation. And so, what I was saying earlier, that crisis is kind of the ultimate competition against circumstance is really true. And so the incentive for any leader to think, especially if they have a tendency towards control and micromanagement, is to remember that, look, you might be able to get away with that for a while when times are good, but when things really get difficult and you need a team of people that are competent and capable and that trust each other, and even better, have some kind of a plan for getting through the crisis, and that's the incentive to try to lead in a better way. So the crisis is lost long before the crisis happens.
Great analogy, and it reminds me of some of the lessons I've learned managing crises in the past 20 or so years, is that you can have the best plan in the world and even have the training, but unless you've actually done some simulation and there's experience with the team working together, and not working together on the thing they're designing or the widget that they're building, et cetera, but working together through an exercise related to the crisis and really seeing how the team play works.
Right.
With that sports analogy is really key. And a lot have learned that lesson from a crisis standpoint. You can have the plan, but you need the experience with it too. So
You do. And you have to learn from other people that have been through it. I remember putting together a mass fatality plan for my forensic lab when I was out in Chicago, which is a really morbid thing to have to do or to think about, but we needed it. But so you put together the plan as best you can, but you have to look and see what other people are doing to get through it and learn from that. So if it does happen to you, you're ready for it.
So with all the leadership resources out there, it seems like people are still really struggling with getting their hands around it. And I know there's a lot of discussions between leadership and management, which we could have a full separate discussion on that.
Yeah.
But why is that? Why is there so much out there, and why are we still struggling with it?
Well, I think it's good that we have a lot of resources out there, right? Because people care about management now, I think, or leadership now in a way that they didn't 50, 60, 70 years ago. Back 1936, when Carnegie wrote, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that was when we first started to really see people realizing that there was something different about management that had to happen. So it's good that we have those resources. But look, I've had firsthand experience teaching leadership workshops, knowing that there were people in my class that were toxic managers, and all they were there to do was to try to get some tips for how they could keep doing things the way they've always wanted to do them and get away with it a little bit better. And so what that means is that I think part of the problem is that individuals look at these resources like books and workshops or courses online or YouTube videos, and they have one of two options. You can either take advantage of these resources for the purpose of informing yourself, or you can take advantage of it to transform yourself. And what happens is I think a lot of people, they take the information to inform themselves, but they have no intention of transforming themselves. Because if you decide that you need to transform yourself, then what you're saying is that the way that you're currently doing things is not adequate for the situation that you're now confronting, which that's going to challenge people's egos. It's hard for people to look at themselves in the mirror and say, I don't have what it takes right now to meet the demands that are placed in front of me. And that's kind of a difficult realization to wrap your brain around. So the need, the reason, it's the lack of desire, or perhaps the lack of courage to confront some truths that require you to change. And look, I think people that realize that they want to change, they will take advantage of those resources. Those that don't want to change are just going to use it to kind of further entrench themselves.
I think it's lack of courage, but also it takes quite a bit of energy to change, as we know too.
And practice. You know, that's a really that's a great point. You know, if I for example, when I was a kid, I used to play the piano, went to piano lessons, which I hated. But now I wish I had done it longer. But in order to play that song that your teacher's trying to teach you, you need repetitions because it develops the neurological pathways that allows you to repeat it without thinking. And so the same holds true with leadership and developing and nurturing relationships in the workplace, is that you have to get reps. You have to decide, say to yourself, okay, what is it that I need to do better more often? And then practice that. And people just don't make that connection and don't do that. And so they don't change.
Great point. So shifting gears here, let's chat briefly about diversity, equity, inclusion. That's where you and I actually met, was a session related to that. How does DEI fit into our conversation today in terms of a leadership competency and maybe something that you're pulled into at this point?
Yeah. Well, look, I think, first of all, I think that there's still a lot, and you and I have talked about this, and I know you encounter this in your work, is that still think that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what diversity, equity, inclusion mean and what the significance is of it to a team. And I think that when you're dealing with a high stakes, high pressure environment, or there's a lot of anxiety in your culture, you're going to tend to revert back to some of your habits and your traditional ways of doing things, which may not include diversity. So, we have to appreciate that when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about, making sure that we have a certain number of people with a particular skin color or that look a certain way, or we have a certain number of men and women and all that kind of stuff. It's really about the perspectives that you're trying to give your team access to by opening up your potential workforce to a broader array of people, so that you can get people on your team that give you a diversity of perspectives. And so if you get into the habit of just trying to hire or look or recruit a certain kind of candidate according to your own personal bias or thinking habits, then you're depriving your team of the perspectives that it's going to need to compete more effectively. So where does it come in? I think it comes in when your team is under stress, you're going to have a hard time look, people that are dealing with anxiety are internally driven. They're internally focused. They're in the coping cycle. They're trying to protect themselves. They don't have the energy to be curious about how a variety of perspectives or a diversity of perspectives could actually help our team. They're trying to cope.
Sure.
And so that's where I think it breaks down. So I think teams that manage stress better are going to be more successful with DEI initiatives.
Such a good point. And we know that bias actually comes out quite a bit more, to your point, when you are under stress. That's when it tends to go up and manifest itself. So
absolutely.
That's right. So even if you're very intentional and trying to have a broader perspective, when you're pushed, we tend to resort to what we know or what our thought patterns are. So great answer. So last question I'm going to ask you, and then we will open it up for questions, as we do try and keep this to 30 minutes to be conscious of time. So you have a new book coming out, which I'd love for you to tell our viewers a little bit about.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. It's called The New Superior. And I'm expecting it to be out in the summer or fall of next year. And what it is it looks at redefining what it means to be a superior in an organization. And in the book, I talk a lot about the old superior, which was adherence to hierarchy, rank, stature, and authority, and not prioritizing the earning of trust as a leader, but just giving orders. And so I make the point in the book that, we're really good at hierarchies. We're good at structuring organizations and saying who should report to whom and, what that should look like. And we're good at creating hierarchies where dominant personalities can rise to the top, but a hierarchy isn't necessarily a team, and a dominant personality isn't necessarily a leader. And so the book explores that, and I'm really excited about it. I'm getting close to the end of the manuscript, and it's been a fun project.
Well, awesome. I think that would be something that maybe we can revisit at a later date. And
That'd be great.
I expect an advanced signed copy of it too.
Oh,
so.
done. Done.
Awesome. So Janice, we'll turn it back to you if you want to come back. Do we have any questions?
We do actually. We have one question. In addition to helping your team better manage stress, how else can you help your team embrace DEI?
Well, you want to communicate a vision. That's a great question. It's really important. You want to communicate a vision and be clear about, as a leader, what it is that you see in the future that you want to move towards. So what is the diversity, equity, and inclusion going to create for you? What's the value that it's going to create for you as a team? And try to bring that vision to reality so people they can hear it, they can see it in their mind's eye, they can feel it. They want those perspectives. They want to recognize the value that exists in every person that's on your team. But a lot of times people think somewhat cynically of DEI initiatives because they think it's just about checking boxes and all that kind of stuff. But no, it's not. It's about empowering your team with perspective. And just helping people understand what the end game is, that it's not just about checking boxes. It's actually a strategic advantage. And here's how it impacts you and you and you, everybody on your team in a positive way. And then when people understand how it benefits them, they can commit to it more readily.
I just saw Laura chatted in, empowering your team with perspective. Love that. And that's what I was going to jump in and say. We'll give you credit for it, John, but I have a feeling that's going to roll off my tongue in the near future. That's a great answer, because we know at DE&I that it's really key that it's tied to your strategy and your vision, or it becomes a committee.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
Great.
We did have one more question that came in with the registration. How did some of your experiences as a forensic expert influence your new book?
Oh, well, thank you for the question. So Janice, you mentioned about the bombing of the '96 Olympics and then the Atlanta serial bombs that happened after that. I got to see what an outdated management style does in a high stakes situation. And also how more nurturing, motivating, inspiring management styles causes people to really achieve levels of greatness. And, in this case, to solve a case that was on the international, is one of the biggest manhunts in human history. But you get to see how personality impacts people. So one of the things, in fact, this may be a good thing to close with, is that I really encourage people to don't overly rely on your personality to lead. I like to be able to ask clients, what is your process? What is your leadership process? What do you do over the course of the year? What are the things that you try to touch on? Because when we just rely on personality, we're more vulnerable to the ebbs and flows that happen in our environment. But in an investigation like the Olympic bombing, we're focused on process. These are the things that we have to do to get this done, and we solve the case.
Great.
Great insight. Well, John, thank you so much for joining me. We look forward to the book. It's been a wonderful discussion. I look forward to chatting with you again. And Janice, thanks for leading us. You want to close us out and give everyone info about the video and all that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us. We will be, this is being recorded, so we will be posting this on social. You'll get a copy of it emailed to you. And that's all I have. Thanks, John, for joining us.
Thank you.
Today.
Thanks, Kimberly. Thanks, Janice.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.